Hi, thank you all for joining us today for the introduction to Department of Defense grant funding. We're doing this for the School of Nursing, and we have kind of a tailored approach for y'all. We have Lieutenant Colonel Van Fossen here today, who is the Chief for Center for Nursing Science and Inquiry from Brooke Army Medical Center. That's going to give us some knowledge on the specifics for nursing research in relation to DOD. Now, this is kind of a brief overview of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the Military Health Institute here at UT Health San Antonio, go over the uniformed services overview, give you a nice bit of knowledge on the different military branches. We're going to talk about DOD Research Organization and really kind of dive into the details of DOD research. Then we're going to give you some tips for successful proposals, and then talk about what support the Military Health Institute provides, and they give you additional useful information, and then save some time at the end for questions. So MHI, our mission is really important. We strengthen UT Health San Antonio's collaborative efforts by improving the health and resiliency of our nation's military service members, veterans, and their families. We have 4 pillars. You see them there: research, education, clinical advocacy, and engagement. The most important one is research. We help faculty members and facilitate for faculty members collaboration with military and DOD partners, and we help them get their grants to the right people so they can continue their research. We like to say military health is in our DNA because it really is. Being a veteran myself and a wounded veteran, I understand the importance of military health and the advancements of military health. And that picture is Sergeant Shiloh Harris and his beautiful daughter. Over 80% of Shiloh Harris's body was burned after an IED explosion. The advancements in military health have helped him regain a sense of normalcy in his life. That is our mission here at MHI. We have specific things that we do to provide support. We provide awareness of DOD grant opportunities. We have a SharePoint Excel spreadsheet where we update and work with the Office of Sponsored Programs to make sure you are aware of different grant opportunities. We mentor on DOD grant proposal development. We have a faculty associate program that we pair you up with a faculty member who is experienced in DOD grants to help you on your path to submission. We connect research with potential military partners. We have agreements with all of the different military units and partners around San Antonio as well as the nation. We actively work with Brooke Army Medical Center and the 59th Medical Wing and make sure that our researchers are connected to the right people. We coordinate formal draft proposal review. When you're writing a grant and you're trying to get into the DOD, we're going to make sure that that draft is looked at multiple times by experts to ensure its successful submission. We support with MHI letters of endorsement. So any letter of support that we can provide to your grant to show that you have institutional support is important for us. Then we establish partnering agreements to facilitate our collaborative efforts, like with Brooke Army Medical Center. So we're going to go over real quick the uniformed services. So a lot of people actually don't know this, that there are 8 different uniformed services. At the top there, you see the Department of Defense, United States Army, the Marine Corps, hoorah, I was in the Marines, United States Navy, Air Force, and yes, Space Force. Those are the Department of Defense. Then you have the Department of Homeland Security, Coast Guard, Department of Health and Human Services, right? The Commission on Public Health, and Department of Commerce, which is the Agriculture, the NDAA, Agriculture Institute. So if you look at this, you kind of get the idea and the different sizes of the branches. So the Army being the biggest branch, has the most members. This is pretty typical because when you look at grants, you're going to see a lot coming out of the Army. As you go down to the Air Force and Navy and Marines, it gets smaller. But each of these branches have different purposes, different ways that they try to assess readiness for their deployed soldiers, airmen, sailors, or Marines. So here's some military terminology just to kind of remember. I'm not going to go over this in detail, but just to kind of reiterate, every branch is different. We have different jargon that we use and different words that we use. To give you an example, a soldier is a person or a service member in the Army. A Marine is a person or service member in the Marines. If you're writing a grant to the Navy about Marine Corps readiness, you don't want to use the term soldier, right? Because you're going to probably offend a Marine like myself and vice versa. You want to make sure that the soldier and the Army, that you're talking about the soldiers, the warriors, the people that they are referenced to. This gives you a leg up when you're submitting proposals. Each branch has a different mission. Army is a land force, traditionally and historically is a land force. Marines are a naval expeditionary force. We are a department of the Navy, so we're traditionally a maritime force. Air Force, air superiority is their goal. You will see that in every grant that they put out there. Coast Guard is a national maritime force. So thinking about these different missions and what they do, you can start to see that each branch is a little different. And you want to make sure that when you're submitting a proposal, you understand that difference. What it kind of boils down to for each branch is understanding medical readiness and the readiness of the service members within that branch. So the Army, for instance, is going to want to focus on the deployment readiness, the medical readiness of every service member that they have so that they are ready, right, to go into the fight. They have the tools, the research, the knowledge that they need in order to be successful on their deployments. Some things to think about readiness is injury and disease. When you're training, injury and sickness happens. So you want to make sure that you're prepared for that. Performance optimization, human performance. How can we get sailors, soldiers, Marines to perform better on the battlefield? Operational medicine, trauma is a big focus. Infectious disease, behavioral health, and rehabilitation are all aspects of understanding that readiness. Now we're going to switch over and we're going to talk about DOD Research Organization. I'm going to introduce to you Lieutenant Colonel Christopher Van Fossen. He is the nurse scientist assigned as the Chief Center for Nursing Science and Clinical Inquiry at Brooke Army Medical Center. Prior to becoming nurse, his clinical experience focused on the care of critically injured and/or burned patients. He deployed in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom with the 28th Combat Support Hospital, serving as a medical, surgical, and burn critical care nurse. He's deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom with the 541st Forward Surgical Team. In his current role, Lieutenant Colonel Van Fossen focused on leading a team of clinical nurse specialists, clinical instructors, and research staff who are focused on leading evidence-based practice and developing a culture of inquiry among the BAMC nursing staff. Please help me welcome our esteemed guest, Lieutenant Colonel Van Fossen.
And the crowd goes wild.
Our capabilities. Generally speaking, in the DOD, we provide about $2 billion, or the DOD provides about $2 billion of their budget every year towards healthcare research in general. There are portions of this research that are, as I mentioned in the slide, requirements driven. That is very acquisitions focused. And when we say that, it means the DOD is looking for a widget or knowledge capability that will answer a question that they have in order to execute their military mission. So when Micah was talking about the Navy, the Air Force, or the Army, and their different requirements to fight the nation's wars, there may be something that the Air Force needs that the Army doesn't really care about. So the Air Force is going to fund that research as it relates to maybe high altitude medical evacuation versus rotary wing medical evacuation that the Army would be responsible for. On the investigator driven side, that is primarily dollars that are very GME oriented. And when I say GME, I mean that in a broader sense, not just medical physicians, but also CRNAs, family nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, physical therapists, any of the allied health services that might be doing graduate level education. And those individuals have a smaller piece of the pie to pull from. When out of that I think I have it on a slide there. Out of the $2 billion, probably 75% of it is acquisitions or requirements driven. And also to note, when we're talking about requirements driven research, those are very specific requirements compared to what you might find in the NIH proposal requests. In other words, they may say, for example, when we talk about blood, we're trying to figure out how to make blood last longer on the battlefield. Don't give me a proposal about blood in general. We want you to have your focus specifically on blood on the battlefield and making it last longer. Then there's CDMRP. CDMRP is Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program. That accounts for a large portion of that $2 billion. I think it's somewhere around in the last fiscal year. I think it was somewhere around 1.6 billion. CDMRP can be a variety of different things because it's often, even though the DOD manages it, it's often not requirements driven. It's congressionally directed based on a particular congressperson's constituency, perhaps. There are things on there that are somewhat related to the Department of Defense, particularly when you're looking at things like certain cancers, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. If we can link it to a potential exposure, then the DOD will be interested in it. So things like Duchenne's muscular dystrophy and many types of cancer, and you can see on the slide, $560 million of that CDMRP money is directed towards some form of cancer. Those are a little bit more broadly written. They don't necessarily have to be operationally focused, but they're DOD associated because of potential exposures of service members when they're fighting wars, maybe in Vietnam, for example. Agent Orange, there's a lot of research kind of stemming from exposures to Agent Orange. In comparison, the DOD's medical research budget is fairly small when you look at NIH budget, $43 billion. However, I will tell you that in terms of trauma care, nobody funds trauma care like the DOD. The NIH's budget for trauma care is less than $1 billion. The VA, for all VA sponsored research, healthcare research, $2 billion. And then BARDA, which is a subset of the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Health and Human Services, they are disaster response related. So you can get money from BARDA often for burn related research, but they focus a lot on CBRN and so chemical, biological, radioactive, and nuclear and explosive research and responses to those events. So that's about $1.6 billion. Those are fairly broad. The VA, the NIH, and the BARDA are fairly broad. Again, the DOD research tends to be pretty focused with the exception of that GME-oriented research. To say that DOD research is complicated is probably an understatement. The problem lies within the many restrictions that are often found in Title 10 of the United States Code, which stems many years back. If you remember your bioethics courses as a part of the city training that many of us PhDers have to undergo, when you think about the Tuskegee Airmen and all of the different research processes that they went through without any kind of consent. So there are some very specific legal language that limits how DOD money can be used, and which makes things a little bit more challenging for us. And then because, particularly in the Army, because we are a bit of a political organization, oftentimes when something shows up in the news, well, then there's a policy later that restricts the way Army personnel can conduct research without that level of oversight. That's why an organization like the Military Health Institute is so important to help you kind of navigate some of those requirements and restrictions. So Medical Research and Development Command, it right now belongs to the United States Army. It will soon transition over to the Defense Health Agency. The Defense Health Agency is a TriService, if you consider the Navy as being the Marines' parent organization. The Marines don't have their own healthcare system. They rely on the Navy healthcare system. So when we say DHA, we're talking TriService, the three services, and the Marines are included. And the Space Force now is included in the Air Force. But Medical Research and Development Command will move under DHA as of 1 October of 2022. But their job within the Army right now is to develop responsive and responsible research proposals and products to answer the Army's call to fill gaps that allow them to execute the military operations that they need to in future combat. And they tend to focus on 5 and 10-year gaps. So things that we need to fill within those 5 or 10 years. Then Army Futures Command, which is up in Austin, will fund things that are 25, 30, 40 years down the road. And a very small portion of their budget is medically oriented. Let's see. We talked about advancing in military medicine. Obviously, one of the goals is protecting service members from injury, illness, but then, of course, responding on the battlefield when people are injured or do get sick. And there are 5 focus areas within Medical Research and Development Command are infectious disease, which is primarily preventive in nature, but also responsive in nature. So trying to identify how to, one of the main focuses as of late has been trying to deal with biofilm, remnant biofilm on devices or on implants, for example. When you put a rod in somebody's femur, especially if you do that in an operational environment, it may not be clean. And so if you can treat that person's infection, that's great. But if there's a biofilm on that rod, they could develop a secondary infection later on. So trying to find ways of dealing with the biofilms. Combat casualty care is a broad term that encompasses primarily trauma care. And as of late, we have been focusing primarily on use of blood products. We made a lot of movement in improving combat casualty care early on in the war with the renewed use of tourniquets, for example. And the way, by the way, here in San Antonio, we have really pushed the envelope a little bit by working so closely with Medical Research and Development Command and the San Antonio Fire and Emergency Medical Services. They put tourniquets on people very quickly after trauma injury, and they provide whole blood to patients who are exsanguinating at the point of injury very quickly. And a lot of that is very much based on the research that we've done in Medical Research and Development Command. Military operational medicine is primarily preventive medicine outside of the infectious disease world. So looking at other ways of making sure that service members are physically healthy and capable of doing their job. You might be looking at things like muscle strength and muscle or bone injury challenges, those types of things. Chemical and biological defenses seems like that's fairly self-evident. You know, we're trying in that realm. They are trying to develop ways of fighting off things like chemical and biological weaponry and those responses. But in addition, one of the things we've started to add, in part because of the narcotic epidemic here in the United States, is looking at ways that there is potential that now I'm just thinking about this, make sure I don't give away any classified information, but there are ways that certain medications can be operationalized. And so we have to develop ways of responding to those potential overdoses, for example. And so the chemical biological defense arm of MRDC is actually looking at some of that. And then clinical rehabilitation and medicine, or clinical and rehabilitative medicine, really is looking at how can we improve service members' quality of life after they've been injured and return to the States and are trying to get as close to normal life as possible. And this is just a shot of their website with their mission. we don't need to go into that, but I would encourage you all, if you are interested in any of those topics, to visit this website and just kind of browse around. There's even opportunities, if you search around on the website long enough, you'll find a link. If you have a particular idea that you wanted to propose to MRDC, there are ways that you can submit those ideas. This is, again, talking about Congressional Directly Medical Research Program. It is managed by Army Medical Research and Development Command, but it is not Army money. It's earmarked from congressional funds for the entire DOD. And actually, the vast majority of this money doesn't go to DOD. It goes to civilian entities like universities and private research companies. It targets very critical gaps in the research. As I mentioned before, they have a typical, their peer review process is slightly different. And this is mimicked on the MRDC side for Army money as well, in that they will submit a proposal, or they will announce funding through a request for proposals. And then they will ask you to submit like a 3-page pre-proposal. And then they will screen the ideas, and of the ideas that they get, they will and then invite you to submit a full proposal. And the pre-proposal, typically I've seen, will be turned around after they've screened it, will be turned around within about a month. And then the full proposal, usually you get 2 to 3 months to submit that full proposal if you are invited for a full proposal. Sometimes, and this is a thing with federal money, sometimes you will see an announcement with a very short turnaround. And that's because the money was maybe earmarked for something else, and the DOD or another part of the federal government decided, well, we're not going to use it for that anymore, but we need to spend it because the money expires and it goes back to the Treasury after a certain number of years. And so they may submit a request for proposals very quickly and then expect a very quick turnaround. So just be prepared for that. If you see something, always pay attention to how quickly you have to turn that around. And we talked about those are historically from Congress, their apportionments there. And those are usually line item specific within the DOD budget. So they can't be redirected to other parts, other efforts within the DOD. And these are just kind of a rundown of some of the many things that are funded by CDMRP. As I mentioned, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, several different types of cancer there. We have the peer-reviewed Alzheimer's, peer-reviewed cancer, peer-reviewed medical and orthopedics. Traumatic brain injury and psychological health is one that is actually got, I think, quite a bit of money coming here to the San Antonio area to facilitate some of that research. Gulf War illness, just all kinds of different things that are not specifically related to an ongoing requirement within the DOD, but because there is specific requests within Congress, or as I mentioned, there's some linkage to previous military operations, they earmark several $1 million to cover these particular topics. By the way, one that I find interesting, we've only got a fairly large crowd here, but don't shout over. But can you guys guess why bone marrow failure is funded? To me, this seems kind of odd at first glance.
To find somebody that, there's not a lot of matches in the bone marrow.
No, it's a little bit more military related than you might think, because of the nuclear capabilities. So when you are exposed to radiation, high doses of radiation, like a service member might if they were operating in a nuclear environment, you may have bone marrow failure. So it's how do we treat people who have bone marrow failure due to exposure to radiation? Yeah. When I first saw that, I was like, wait a minute, I had to look into it. So this is an example of a CDMRP grant that actually calls out nurses, and it's related to kidney cancer. They are interested in identifying training programs to prepare nurses for conducting kidney cancer research. And so it's really, the goal is to link you up with a mentor. They want you to have a mentor to guide you through the process. But because it's a developmental award, it's very broad and it allows for a lot of flexibility, but it just needs to be kind of kidney cancer focused. And this is, again, specific to nursing, which is actually unique within the CDMRP process. Usually CDMRPs are very broadly written and they can be anything from a bench scientist to a practicing clinician. One that's specific to nursing is the TriService Nursing Research Program. This is analogous to NINR from NIH. Their focus is, or their mission is to facilitate nursing research to optimize health of the military member and their beneficiaries. We also have a focus of trying to build nurse scholars. So what we tend to do a lot of is funding our PhD nurses like myself while they're in their educational programs, fund their research, fund their evidence-based practice projects. This particular program, right now, their average funding is about $6 million. About $1 million of that is usually towards administrative requirements. The one catch to this is you can't apply for a TSNRP funded grant unless you are active duty military or have a military retiree or reservist on your team. And they would probably, if I remember right, the expectation is that military person has to be the PI. So reach out and touch somebody if you don't have a military person in your organization that could help facilitate these nursing research requests. But the topics are very broad. Within the research interest groups, you can do research on anesthesia, and those are often very bench science oriented. Within the DOD, and nurse anesthetists who are trained at the PhD level actually have PhDs in neuroscience, not in nursing science. The rest of us who are PhD trained tend to either have educational doctorates or PhDs in nursing science. The biobehavioral health research interest group is very focused on biobehavioral health. Expeditionary nursing research interest group is one that I'm a part of, and we tend to focus on operationally oriented efforts. And my particular background is really oriented towards nursing influence on trauma care on the battlefield. So we talk about how can we better train our nurses to be prepared for providing care on the battlefield. Health systems and informatics is really looking at the health system within an MTF or within the organization of MTFs and looking at the way we provide care within those MTFs. Military and family and military women's health obviously are looking at family and women's health questions within the DOD. And here's a couple of examples of funded studies by TSNRP. All of these are fairly recent. Actually, Chrome Migliori's there at the end. It doesn't have a date on it, but it was funded within the last 2 years at least. And she's looking at obviously core content of the military identity for psychological understanding. Moral distress has been a big topic within the DOD over the last couple of years, of course, related to COVID. But even before COVID, it was a question for us, in large part because of what we often have to do on the battlefield, where we're taking care of people, maybe local nationals who, our rules of engagement don't allow us to provide care for the longevity of their life. And so sometimes we need to move them out of our hospital because we have other patients that need to come in. But we're used to providing a certain level of care. And so sending them out to their economy without the level of care that we are used to providing back here in the States can provide nurses with a certain level of moral distress. You have a burn patient who isn't ready to, from the US perspective, from our context here in the United States, isn't ready to be sent home because their wounds aren't fully healed, but you don't have a choice but to send them out because of the rules of engagement or the fact that you have other incoming patients that you need to empty that bed, that provides a certain level of moral distress for the staff. And so that was a question well before COVID. As you can see, it was funded in 2019, before COVID hit. So, just for your information, we just closed the FY22 call, but there should be an FY23 call coming up in August, late August, early September. And those are the typical headings for requests for funding, either through force health protection, nursing competencies and practice, leadership, ethics, and mentoring are the three big bubbles that the nurses seek funding under. Oops. So in order to apply for a DOD grant, the first thing you need to do is find out that there's a grant available. I suggest that you get on ebrap.org. That is a website that provides a lot of the announcements for CDMRP as well as the Medical Research and Development Command. And they will send you, as things are posted, you'll get an email that will send you the announcement. You can also register on grants.gov, and there's a way that you can toggle for certain announcements that you want to receive information from. The TSNRP website is at USIS. And there you have to, unfortunately, the USIS website doesn't allow you to register for notifications. So you have to just visit that frequently. But I can tell you that there are usually 2 to 3 announcements per year. And they're usually December is when it's posted for a call that will close in early February. And then again in late July for a call that will close in late August or early September. And then, of course, Military Health Institute, if you work with them, they can send you updates as they become available because they're monitoring many of these all the time. And as I mentioned, the pre-proposal, with the exception of TSNRP doesn't ask you for a pre-proposal. They just want to receive your full grant proposal. And as long as you meet the funding requirements, they won't kick it back. When I say funding requirements, meaning the eligibility requirements, they won't kick it back. It'll go for a full review first time you submit it. Now, MTech is it's called the Medical Technology and Enterprise Consortium. It's an OTA, which is a very complicated organization that has to have special authority granted under Congress to receive DOD money. And MHI can help you work with them. The idea with MTech is that they basically put together DOD institutions like research labs and universities or industry partners. But the only way that money can be awarded is if there's actually a true partnership between those two organizations, not just in name only. But MTech can help facilitate that. And that's a way that one of the reasons that exists is, again, talking a little bit about that, the timing of money and the expiration of money. And so MTech can help facilitate the government getting that money used without having to worry so much about its expiration. And here, the MTech focuses are essentially the same thing that the Medical Research and Development Command focuses on, with the exception of medical simulation and information sciences. That's a fairly new one that MTech tends to focus on a little bit more than MRDC. And you can just see here, MTech within the last couple of years has gotten some significant grants within the San Antonio area, including that $800,000 here to UT Health Science Center. The School of Nursing looks like they're going to be participating in the Simulation Innovation Center that's also MTech funded. Excuse me. What I would do is suggest that you just reach out to MHI on this. The MTech system is almost as complicated as the DOD system, so you're better off having somebody help you. And just to let you know, locally, what we're doing at BAMC, we have these research and evidence-based practice projects. And I got to tell you, our evidence-based practice projects, that list seems a little small. It's because it is. They're, with COVID, our efforts have been focused primarily on actually executing patient care and not necessarily with evidence-based practice projects. A lot of our CNSs have been pulled off to participate in these supports of civilian authorities missions around the country, as well as the refugee missions. And so we haven't had the people to be able to implement a whole lot of evidence-based practice. With research, I get to buy bodies. So it's a lot easier for me to continue my research efforts than it is with the evidence-based practice projects. But we are working with a company to develop a remote patient safety monitoring system within our EBP portfolio, and that will actually help, we're hoping, will help reduce falls and the need for one-on-one sitters in the organization. And if that works out well, and actually we got the idea from the VA here in town, so they've already got a system like this. So if that works out well here at BAMC, then that may be facilitated throughout the rest of the DOD. My research projects are those interested or looking at humanitarian care in a combat zone. The reform project is actually looking at the way we resuscitate burn patients. We've talked about whether or not you should use plasma, whether or not you should use saline or oral solutions. And so the reform project is actually looking at trying to discern which resuscitation fluids might be best. Deployed Heroes is actually looking at the use of whole blood in the operational environment. So we're taking a retrospective look at the use of whole blood in Iraq and Afghanistan over the last 20 years to see if we can more completely identify how it's been used and where there might have been issues with its use and the negative outcomes associated with that. T6 and BATDOC are two projects, or are two electronic health record type systems that we are trying to discern which of those would be the better option for using far forward on the battlefield. Right now, the only thing we use is stubby paper or stubby pencil and paper. And you can imagine that if it's wet, muddy, or whatever, that data is lost. Or if the helicopter blows the piece of paper away, you got nothing. So that patient shows up to a forward surgical team or a combat support hospital with no record of care. So we're trying to identify which digital record of care might be a usable option. And care for the caregiver is not my study, but it's a study that's ongoing at BAMC that looks at assessing nurses primarily, but also family members of individuals who have suffered from traumatic injury, and just looking at how they are being cared for, how they are building their resilience, those types of things. Then we have 3 new studies. We have a brand new graduate at the university, or at BAMC, brand new PhD grad. She's looking at critical care nurse retention, improving health through berry extracts. That's a continuation of her PhD, of her dissertation work. And then she's looking at health and resiliency, and primarily how that can be affected through nutrition. And so those are 3 interesting studies that are just kind of getting started. So I'll hand this back over to Dr. Wright, who will talk to you about.
Thank you, sir. All right, just kind of rounding this out, thinking about the different tips for DOD and the successful submissions, and really how we can help. Really going through the RFP and reviewing the RFA and really understanding the program mission, program restriction, goal statements, the impact they're looking for, and the key words. Highlighting the key words is going to be really important. This gets into military and congressional purpose, right? Going back to understanding what branch it's coming from and what they want it for. If you can match your proposal with that mission, it's going to help you out. Seek military research partners. Doing your research on your own is good, but with DOD and VA research, if you can partner with a military installation like Brooke Army Medical Center or the 59th Medical Wing here in San Antonio, your proposal's that much better because it directly reflects your engagement with the military population. And we will always assist with that collaboration. Seek mentoring. Even the most seasoned researcher, when they're doing a grant like this, seek mentoring. We have a faculty associates program that we have successful faculty members who've submitted grants and received funding from those grants. We connect them to you to make sure that as you're writing your grant and you're going through this process, you get review and you get that mentorship so you get the top-notch submission. Our MHI support, what we do is we facilitate collaborations. That's big for us. We want to make sure that the military and UT Health San Antonio are working together because that's the benefit for both of us. There's a few things that we help with. There's a trauma think tank and the Department of Surgery for Trauma. We've facilitated Dr. Michael Liss and the Mays Cancer Center with the BAMC HEMONC with clinical trials. Dr. Yogesh Gupta, we helped connect him to Dr. Jason Oculix with infectious disease at BAMC, and Kumar Sharma, Dr. Kumar Sharma with the Seraph pathogen filter. We connect him to what you heard as USIS, as a Uniformed Services University. We provide that mentorship and review that you're looking for. We want to make sure that you have a successful submission because the more DOD research that we get here, the better off we're going to be and the more impact that we have in military and veterans communities. We provide a letter of endorsement, something very simple. If you're writing a grant to show institutional support of your research efforts, will push your proposal that much far. This letter of endorsement comes right from our director, Dr. Byron Hepburn, who is a Major General retired from the U.S. Air Force. We provide networking opportunities. You know, pre-COVID, I always like to say it was a lot easier to provide networking opportunities. But as we're starting to get out of it, knock on wood, we're going to have a lot more in-person events. We have a distinguished lecture that's coming up with Lieutenant General Place, who is the director of the Defense Health Agency, on April the 28th. We hold a quarterly research meeting every quarter. And then we have a military health interest group for students, and they hold events. We want to make sure that you are able to meet with like-minded researchers as much as possible. Some external events, San Antonio Military Health System and Universities Forum, SURF, which is held at UTSA, is going to be June the 16th this year. Military Health Systems Research Symposium is held in August in Florida every year. They'll put out the exact date about a month or month and a half before, and then you can register. That's why it says August. This is final recommendations. Really staying connected. You know, the military community is not as solidified as you think. It's a fluid community, and the needs of that community change with every deployment, with every contact, with every threat that we have out there. It's changing. Think about right now the potential threat that we have in Ukraine, right? Understanding biological, chemical agents are going to be something that definitely might come up later in the future. So understanding what emerging threats are out there is a lot easier if you stay connected. Seeking that mentorship and contacting us to help you is pivotal. We make sure that we connect you as the best that we can to make sure that your submission is successful. Here is the flyer for SURF. I definitely suggest you go. Multiple government agencies, military partners, universities all attend this event on June 16th, and sometimes it's seen as kind of a precursor for some of the researchers to that Military Systems Health Research Symposium in Florida in August. Here's some additional useful information. I'll make sure that School of Nursing has this slide deck and has this useful information. I'm recording this, so we're going to send it, but make sure that you go, like Lieutenant Colonel Van Fossen was saying, to grants.gov, sign up for grants.gov and sign up for alert so you know what Department of Defense grants are coming out and when they come out. Because sometimes if you get it right away, you have a lot more time to write that grant. But if you wait, sometimes the grant will be right around the corner and it's a little bit harder to write because the process is really complicated. So for assistance with DOD grants and collaboration, please feel free to contact me directly or Dr. Hepburn. We want to make sure that we get and improve on DOD research here at UT Health. Thank you all very much. Are there any questions that Lieutenant Colonel Van Fossen or myself can answer?
I actually do, so when we're submitting proposals to the DOD, do you work in collaboration with OSP or does our office work with you?
We work directly with OSP to make sure that we're all communicating and we're all moving in the same direction. I send them alerts weekly. They send me alerts weekly. So we definitely work in tandem with OSP.
And proposal in general.
You don't need to stress over that, we'll figure that out.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you all very much. I appreciate you coming to the introduction to DOD grant funding for School of Nursing. We had one technical difficulty at the end. I think that's pretty good. So thank you all very much. Please contact us if you need any help.